time for Cutting Edge Consciousness with Freeman Michaels and Barnet Bain. Thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
And welcome to Cutting Edge Consciousness. Freeman Michaels here.
With Barnet Bain. I just lost my mic. Good moment. Good moment. Freeman, it's nice to see you.
You recovered quickly. That was good.
I did. You know, it's just, it's all in the reaction time.
It is.
Nice to see you in your seat again.
I know. It's
Welcome.
been a while.
It's great to have you back and across the desk.
It's great to be busy, but it's a little sad because I don't get down here as much as I should.
Not quite as much, but you're certainly rotating through on a regular basis, so I have great comfort in knowing that if I sit still long enough, you will materialize into that.
I will materialize.
Into that chair. You certainly will. So, Spence, good moment to you. Spence is a mute now.
He livened up though the day that
He got excited.
You were guestless. He came in.
He did. He did.
It was nice to hear from him.
He waved a red cape at me, and I charged it.
You charged?
He charged it.
That was a great show, actually. I really enjoyed that. That was kind of fantastic. Your musings for an hour.
Yeah, that's what adrenaline will do to a person.
That's right.
It's a lot of adrenaline when you sit down like 5 minutes before you go live, and there's nobody there. And a full hour with
That's good for you.
Full hour just nonstop. Just nonstop.
So what are we doing today?
Oh boy, there's a lot of interesting things that are up, and they always reduce for me to the same one thing, and that has to do with the enchantment, with the nature of enchantment, the interconnectivity of all things. You know, we're so tied into a mechanistic worldview. There is only one thing. I'm going to ask you a question now.
Okay.
I was about to make a statement.
I was ready for a big statement.
I was about to make a statement, but it's so pretentious to make that statement.
Right,
so I'm going to ask you a question. It'll come out of your mouth, and it'll sound exactly. So, if you think to yourself, what is it that we, as human beings, what is the one thing? What is the one thing that we can be certain of, that we are certain of? There's only one thing that we have certainty around, and what is that?
Uncertainty.
Tick, close, but no cigar, my friend, no cigar. We can be certain around machines.
Oh, right.
Because we built them. And so they conform to a set of expectations, and we understand the cause and effect nature of them. This leads to that, and so when my car breaks, I can repair it.
No, you can't. Someone else can.
That's true. But when my old car broke with the carburetor,
there you go.
I could repair that one.
Right. Your Volkswagen bug.
My Volkswagen,
totally
exactly. When my Volkswagen broke, I understood how this worked with that, and it was entirely knowable. And this is a mindset. You know, we have a certainty around that which we create, and then we falsely project that certainty on the world. And so we approach trees, for example, and flowers and meadows and cliff faces and big waves with the same kind of worldview, this mechanistic worldview that I understand how it works. And of course, it doesn't conform to logic and to reason, and there's a different calculus there. It's a living thing and unknowable. Yeah. Absolutely unknowable. And so there is
unknowable perhaps from the mindset of trying to control it.
Which is the only mindset we have.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think there are other faculties that can come on board and ways of knowing things that don't deduce down to,
absolutely.
Bits that cogs and wheels and levers, and there's a different way of looking at the world.
That is absolutely true.
Which is why you're going to read the bio of our guest today.
That is exactly why, which is why I love to thread back to this idea that I call it the enchantment. It is a way of calibrating into reality with different intelligences beyond the very narrow bandwidth of logic and reason. And so I want to first, by roundabout way of introducing our guest, I want to quote something I read of his that I love.
He's very quotable, by the way.
He is quotable. That's why he's here, so he can speak for himself.
I know. But go ahead, quote him.
When we realize that every atom we are made of has an infinite connectivity to all things, then we start to feel our role in the larger picture of the wheelworks of nature. Now, it is so gorgeous because it is this holistic idea that I just sort of referenced obliquely, as opposed to this mechanistic worldview.
Well, and it feels right.
It feels right in the body. It feels right in our greatest truth holder. And so with that, I want to welcome Nassim Haramein, who is a cosmologist and a new energy inventor and the founder of the Resources Project Foundation. Resonance. I can't read my own writing. I can't read my own note taking. I should have known that, but I didn't.
Resonance Project. It's so perfect, too, because resonance is such a brilliant piece of language. So welcome.
Welcome to Cutting Edge Consciousness. Good to have you here.
It's great to be with you guys. Thank you for having me.
So so the metaphysics of unity, which we've been splashing around in, and there's a mystical tradition around, is now science.
Well, yeah, there's actually more and more evidence that those ideas, those concepts, are actually not just philosophical or spiritual or even religious ideas, but they actually are the way things work. And that it is this nonlinear interconnectivity of all things that makes up the world around us.
And a couple years back, you wrote a paper that was very well received, though I'm sure it rocked some boats as well.
It sure did.
That was because, and I want to set this up. So the quantum physics and the sort of traditional physics,
relativistic,
were sort of accepted that the twain should not meet. We're going to just leave them as separate, even though they both are provable and understandable, but only separately.
Right.
And what I understand, and this is really a layman's, because for me the physics stuff gets very wonky very quickly.
Yeah.
But what I understand is, you kind of went a different route, and what this paper did is it brought them together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To me, obviously, we couldn't have, and to Einstein as well, we couldn't have physics for the very small quantum theory and physics for the very large relativistic equation, and not have some set of physics that connected the two, because big things are made out of small things. So obviously there must be physics that actually explain it all, and that's taught as a unified field theory. And Einstein worked on it till literally the day he died, like hours before his death. He was still trying to solve that. And he believed there was a geometric solution. He believed that there was a simple, beautiful geometric solution. And that definitely inspired me very early on. And when I did research for some 25 years, 30 years, and all the way through it, I could see the beauty. I could see the geometry emerging all the way through it.
So this is actually the direction I want to go. One of the things I love, and I've researched you, is when the math plays out. And I know in one part of this investigation of the proton, there's a mathematics that actually equates to the speed of light as woven in. And all of that is fascinating, and I don't really know what you're talking about. But what I loved about how you described it is it was beautiful. And that, to me, strikes me, and I know, Barnet, we've talked about this a lot, is orienting towards beauty generates a kind of truth, if you will, or a way of relating to the world that I find fulfilling. Like when you were just describing, Barnet, that quote, it feels good. Again, we're back to different calibrating. So I love this merging of, can physics be beautiful? And can we organize in such a way? And the ancient geometries, which you're saying is the backbone of the angle from which you came into this, right?
Exactly, yeah, absolutely.
And the seeking of the beauty, as opposed to trying to control and manipulate. Right? It's a different orientation.
Yeah, it's an approach in which you take a holistic view from the start. Like you look at the whole instead of reductionism, where you break things into smaller and smaller and smaller bits and try to understand the bit. And then if you understand the bit, hopefully you understand the whole. I went at it from the completely opposite side, where I looked at the whole and kind of sat with it for many years. I was a pro skier, I was a climber, I was out there. A surfer.
Don't forget that. Yeah. That's why Barnet loved you so much.
And I was out there experiencing nature and feeling it, you know. And everywhere I looked, I could see geometry. Everywhere I looked, I could see a pattern, and like, why is this pattern in the branches of a tree that repeats like in fractal structures everywhere? Like, all the trees have the same, fundamental mathematics that that they expand on, and their roots and the flowers, the way they blossom, and I could see geometry. And so I thought there must be some fundamental pattern underneath all that nature is mapping to. And if I can like back engineer from the whole to the part, then maybe I can find that solution to unify physics.
So when you begin to make that sort of inquiry, reverse engineering the map.
Yes.
Did there come a point when you asked yourself the question, when you said, my goodness, I don't see any distinction, any separation in the map between what I am mapping and the mapper?
Right, that's the thing.
So does it come to a place where you begin to experience yourself as the map? What is my identity? Does it separate? Do I stop here? Do I stop here? Do I stop here?
Exactly.
Or is my experience me?
Right.
Am I one with it?
Exactly. That's the more esoteric research adventure that, like, the conclusions that I was coming to when I was doing the physics and the math had profound implication to who I am, how I relate to myself, I relate to the universe around me, and how I relate to others. So like the growth that I was, allowed to, emerging from my own work was tremendous. Like, and I had big moments where I would make very significant discoveries, and I had to stop doing anything for days just to integrate in my being how do I live with this now? How, because it was changing my worldviews. It was rocking my own boat. And
I love this.
So I'm very curious. If you don't mind, I want to scratch a little deeper at this, because this is gold. When I hear this, I think, wow, what can I learn from your experience? How did it begin to change your relationship with people and things in your experience? How did you become or not become more intimate or more relational with them?
Well, there was many different moments over a 25-year period, but I think overall, if I was to try to qualify it, is that it, like, for instance, much of the work I did was showing me mathematically that everything is intimately connected, that everything is completely entangled, that the universe is talking to itself at all scales, from infinitely big to infinitely small, and basically this information network and the energy that it produces as it talks to itself is what we call reality. It's self-organized in this incredible, miracle that we call biology at the end of the scale there. And so when I was discovering this, as I was discovering it, I was feeling within my body, within myself, deeper and deeper level of connectivity with who I am, because, like, who am I? Well, at the end of the day, in the material world, who am I is 100 trillion cells, that are like incredibly well organized, that are talking to themselves, to each other at incredible speed, that are duplicating at a rate that's unconceivable, to maintain, and like billions of chemical change every second, and so on. Like, this whole thing is talking, and we think of we kind of forget that we think of ourselves as like, well, this is just me, right? Mm-hmm. But this whole thing is occurring.
As opposed to me in relationship with me, capital M, a me that I don't have an intimacy with and I think is other.
Right, exactly. I think of a cell as something else than me, but in fact, that is me. And then that cell is made of 100 trillion atoms, and they're all talking because they are coherently making that cell. And all this, and it goes on and on and on. And so deeper I got into feeling the connectivity and experiencing it as I wrote the math, and it kept on showing me how it connects and what geometry and how it produces mass and energy and all this stuff. I felt deeper and deeper this connection with the universe, with myself, with people around me. And, then you start to have empathy for things.
These are organizing energies. We have to take a break. But what I'm just fired up about personally is the beauty and truth sort of cliche. Truth is beauty, beauty is truth. And how the organizing of I felt my way to something. And when we come back, I actually want to shift. I mean, what we're talking about is brilliant, but I want to shift a little just to talk about this other way of operating, coming at something from the perspective of how it feels, how it's revealed to us, that it's about connection, and that is a way to deeper truth. That, for me, is profound personally, and I think it opens up a broad conversation. So
we will reconnect after we hear from these messages.
Welcome back to Cutting Edge Consciousness, thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
Welcome back to Cutting Edge Consciousness. This broadcast and podcast is made possible with support from Hierophant Publishing and Insight Events USA, producers of books and events for body, mind, and spirit. We like them. We hope that you will like them too. So before the break, Freeman, you were all lit up about something.
Well, it's interesting. The theme that is really apparent in my life is wanting to control things, going about things in a very masculine way, right? It's about dominance, it's about controlling, it's about being right. Doesn't work for me personally. What I'm seeing reflected back in my world is that it doesn't work on a lot of levels. The imbalance is pushing the planet in a direction that's not helpful, and then all these little ways. I heard a conversation you were having, and something you said got me excited, that there's about this imbalance, about this sort of masculine way of approaching it. You were talking about the Hadron Collider in Switzerland, and how they're building a bigger mechanism to, because they're insistent it has to, this Higgs particle and discovering it has to happen, and your sense is that's not going to happen. It doesn't look like that.
Right.
And getting bigger and building bigger rockets and bigger mechanisms is not the way to go. So that piece is both interesting as a strategy and approach, but for me, the deeper thread is just this theme, similar to what feels right, and looking for beauty and looking for patterns, and how that opens up possibility, whereas the old paradigm or mentality is cut off to that. So just in general, I hope I set up enough that you can speak to either what you were trying to say in before, or how you might approach that today.
Yeah, we try to understand atomic structure by colliding them at very high velocity and very large experiments that are very expensive as well. Our approach to motivation is to, put fuel in a chamber and explode it and push a piston. And, it's all based on explosion, force, trying to overcome nature. We built rocket that look like big phallic symbols, that we put all this fuel in it, and then light up the bottom, find a few volunteers to stick on top, and then hope that they're going to survive the journey, fighting gravity all the way through. But what about harmonizing with gravity? What about, actually understanding how gravity works at its most fundamental level and then creating resonance relationship with the natural world? That has very much possibilities that could completely change our world. Imagine that all of a sudden we understand how to harmonize with gravity so we can control it in certain ways so that we can get it to flow in the direction we want to go. We're talking space travel, we're talking...
Well, you're talking metaphysics too. I mean, you
Absolutely.
really are talking a different approach to physics that then opens up other realms that for me are like, yeah,
exactly. And maybe you could think of it more feminine approach where you're actually trying to harmonize instead of dominate.
It presumes a willingness to consider that the natural world is responsive to one's personal subtle energies of thought, of emotion, of connection, of imagining.
Yes.
That is quite a large presumption to make in a world that finds these directions intellectually dubious, because we are so enamored of that very thin bandwidth of intellectual knowledge.
Yes. And
No,
yet,
as opposed to understanding. Very
Right.
different thing, knowledge and understanding.
That's right.
Facts and living under the weight of the impact of those facts, which is understanding, are two very different things.
Exactly. And yet, funny enough, the physics, and I'm talking the standard model physics of quantum theory, actually tells us that our observation has a significant influence on the outcome of an experiment.
Nothing is real until it is observed.
Yes.
And well, there's you bring up a point that makes me laugh all of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So science is enamored with double-blind experiments,
Oh, yes.
and yet because they are concerned that if somebody had any inkling of what an experiment might be about, their emotion about it or their thought about it may somehow influence magically.
Right.
And yet in the very same breath, there is no room for magic in a data-based.
Exactly.
Everything is empirical and everything is data-driven. So this, I've never heard this fundamental disconnect addressed by anyone.
I know. It's so obvious in the placebo effect, you know, where a person, if you tell them you're giving them something that's going to remove their tumor or take care of their illness, whatever, and you're giving them sugar pills, 30% to 50% will actually go in remission and recover from whatever illness just miraculously, and we just call it, oh, that's the placebo effect, and then everybody goes on with their business. And it's like, wait a minute, like, this is remarkable. There's placebo surgery as well, tests that have been done where the surgeon actually just opened the person but doesn't do the surgery and then sew them back up and tells them the surgery was done, and the person recover as if they had, whatever removed, and so it's really remarkable that is not investigated more in the context of physics as well as medicine and so on, but as well in the context of really understanding how this works. And I quoted quantum mechanics this way, but I want to be clear that the double-blind experiment that led to this understanding of the collapse of the waveform and all this stuff, and the observer, actually is not necessarily an appropriate interpretation on how this works. And this is why it hasn't gone very far in almost 100 years of physics, meaning the understanding is not there. When we discovered this, basically physicists agreed to completely get rid of any concept of mechanics that makes this happen and just go into conceptual math. And there's famous saying, I think, from Feynman that says, just do the math and shut up, and like, don't try to understand it. Don't try to, it's just too weird. Just if you do the math this way, it will come out right, but don't try to visualize it. And I was drastically, opposed to that idea, and so was Einstein. That he believed that there was some fundamental beauty, there was some fundamental geometry, there was some fundamental way we could understand it, that we could understand how the observer and the observer connected. And if we did, then all of a sudden we would have like the key to how creation occurs.
There are maps. I'll be really brief on this. There are maps that you've referenced earlier. You made the distinction between the force map, which we're very well familiar with, and then Freeman, you were talking about a map of that embodied was the territory of more feminine energies, of willingness, not just will. The possibility of force as opposed to force. And so there has not been, if I understand you correctly, there has not been much attention paid to these more subtle energetics of imagining, of willingness, of desire, and of expectation as maps that are causal.
Right.
They are themselves causal, and there has not been too much attention paid to that.
Yeah, they're typically dismissed as, not objective, appropriate investigation of science. Yet, as I said, the science itself forces us to actually account for the observer.
And that is those are the energies of the placebo magic.
Exactly.
These are magical energies.
They are.
They're pervasive throughout nature. Magic is a function of being alive in this world.
That's right.
We've divorced ourselves from it.
Exactly. I think Einstein said you can live your life as if everything is a miracle. And so, or you can, I can't remember the rest, but along those lines, it's like, there is a miracle occurring.
Yeah.
And the fact that we're here looking back at the universe, wondering how it works, is an incredible miracle. There's nothing in current physical theory, whether in quantum theory or in relativistic equations, that predicts that even a monocellular system would ever come to be. There's nothing in physics that accounts for any biology to emerge, never mind biology that has, self-awareness. I
was about to ask you that, is there anything in physics that points to the possibility that a cell might develop an awareness of itself as a system in relationship to a system and then turn inward and become self-reflective?
Absolutely not.
It's all just that consciousness is an epiphenomenon of brain function, of biochemistry.
Yeah, and then there's a big gap because there is no physics that explain how even a monocellular system, like just one cell, came to exist. Already one cell is too complex for, to have developed under random function, because the physics we use today believe that the universe is random, that things occur by chance, that things collide together and eventually figures out how to become more complex. But, from a Big Bang event 13.7 billion years ago. However, if you do the math on that, it doesn't add up. The probability of even just one cell developing with all the complexity in it the probabilities we calculated it a few weeks ago. It was around 10 to the 8,896 probability.
Those are good odds.
they're really
Let's go to Vegas this weekend, right?
Yeah,
Those are good
exactly.
odds.
I mean, to give an idea of that, how big that number is, the size of the universe and the radius of the universe in centimeters is 10 to the 28 centimeters. So 10 to the 8,000 is outrageous.
It's infinitesimal.
So the fact that we're here is an incredible miracle. But this is where the debate comes in, because the tendency then, and the reason why scientific paradigm is holding dead fast to this, is because then the tendency is to go into religious belief and say, oh, well, then there must be a God. And, we can't understand God, and it's some guy that's sitting up there in a throne and he's organizing everything. And there's a middle path. There's an option in between those two. And that is that the system is self-referential, and that it has feedback. As soon as you have a little feedback, all of a sudden these odds of complexity emerging goes down to almost zero, because the system is learning about itself. And so in a very short amount of time, it can produce very large levels of complexity.
But now you're still speaking of a system inside time-space, organized inside time-space.
Well, not necessarily. You can have feedback outside of time and space in an entangled quantum universe.
Feedback from outside, but what about the notion of a universe as it exists beyond time-space?
Yeah.
Now we don't know that it's a feedback. Our assumptions totally break down, don't they?
No, not necessarily, because you can have instantaneous communication at a distance. So that, by the definition, is outside time and space. And we know that is occurring in the universe. It's called entanglement. We know that particles can be from one side of the universe to the other, and you change one over here and the other one change over there instantaneously. So, and we've done all these tests, and we know this is occurring. And so the information in the universe may be communicated in a non-linear way, in an instantaneous way, where everything is actually talking to everything instantaneously across all scales, so that when you move your little finger, everything in the universe knows you've moved that finger and adjusts for it. And that's how
huge implications.
Yeah,
huge
incredible.
Implications.
Incredible.
What's brilliant to me, because we've for 5 years now, come at consciousness as a conversation and tried to play at our own edge. That's the intent behind this show, the edge of possibility for both of us. What's possible?
Right.
And I love that we can have conversations with artists. We can have conversations with surfers. We can have conversations with surfers who are also physicists across the board. And it's really it's the same conversation in all these different ways, because it's really just a conversation about consciousness. And when we talk about 100 years till now, and the sort of catching up, if you will, the increase in technology and the interconnectedness, right? The internet that we've developed, which is such a beautiful replication of what was already going on. I mean, what you're saying on the quantum level is essentially the internet.
Exactly.
It's a version of it.
Yeah.
Right? We are the internet. We just created an outward manifestation of something that was already innately part of our being. And so what's happening is consciousness is catching up now. Because now we have a external mechanism that can mirror in a particular way the internal mechanism. And so all these ideas now can be assimilated in a way that 100 years ago they couldn't.
Exactly.
And 20 years ago they couldn't.
Yeah, because you couldn't even imagine 100 years ago that everybody could talk across the internet, almost instantaneously, and that, all this stuff could happen. Or 150 years ago, you couldn't imagine that you get on a plane and go across to Australia and hang out there for a few days and then come back. I mean, that was completely outside the paradigm. And so that's the idea, is that there's a constant flow of information from inside to outside and from outside to inside. There's a constant feedback of information across boundaries. And you could think of the boundary maybe as yourself, or the boundary of a cell, or the boundary of an atom, or boundary of a particle, and that the information is feeding back across all these scales and across all these boundaries. And it's learning about itself. The universe is literally learning about itself by reflecting back at itself across the boundary. And when
Hall of Mirrors.
Yeah, and when the information moves across the boundary, it produces energy. And that's what we call E, because in E equals mc square, there is not really we know it's equivalent, right? But we don't know what E is, and we don't know what M is, and we certainly don't know why C is C. We don't know why the speed of light is the speed of light. So we have unknowns that are equivalent. And now it's time to understand the root of these things.
All right, I want to take a quick break because that's part of what we have to do.
Yes.
When we come back, I also want to shift this conversation to talk about new paradigms in energy, because I know this is a big conversation you've been having, that we've been looking at harnessing energy, again, from this old sort of phallic symbol model where bigger is better, and there's a whole different paradigm of how energy can be harnessed that changes, potentially, the entire human experience. So I want to weave in some of those pieces, because I think our audience will be very interested in some of the research you've been doing and what your ideas are about where we might be going in that particular regard and others. So let's take a quick break, folks. Stay with us. We'll be right back after these messages.
Welcome back to Cutting Edge Consciousness, thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
And we're back here on Cutting Edge Consciousness, having a crazy conversation, because it's crazy for a lot of people. And Nassim, what I want to come right back to, and I sort of hinted at it before the break, is you're talking about energy in a way that's dramatically different than how we presently think about it. And while the physics for me is fascinating, I'm always looking for what are the implications. So I'm going to jump ahead of the physics for a moment, and just suggest that we don't need fossil fuels. We don't need if we shift how we look at energy, all kinds of things are possible. What are those things?
Amazing things, from being able to control gravity in such a way that we can use it to levitate things, meaning, we can have gravity pull us to the ground, but if we are able to reverse that, we can get gravity pushing us anywhere we want to go.
Kind of like a magnet. When magnets are of the whatever causes them to push, that's the other side of gravity.
Exactly. You can, if we understand how energy works at its most fundamental level, we can extract energy from the source of energy that makes up everything in the universe. And that's a non-trivial source. When we calculate that, the amount of energy in a centimeter cube of space exceed all the stars in the universe combined. So if we extracted 1/10 of a billionth of a percent of the energy in the space between you and I here, we could run the planet for thousands and thousands of years with all its energy needs, with no or environmental impact, or extremely little environmental impact. So imagine the difference that would make. There's an implication to health, to longevity. It's a completely different world. As soon as we understand, where the E comes from in E equals mc squared, and where the M comes from, and why C is C, then all of a sudden it comes together, and now we have a completely different world.
And how far away do you think that understanding lies?
I think we're right there on the cusp. I think we're so close. It's within the next decade this will happen.
The question, though, is the consciousness ready? Because, look, some of the things that, again, having listened to your work, there are things we may have known 100 years ago that implied exactly what you're talking about today. It simply was dismissed. Certain experiments revealed things that really ought to have been important.
Tesla.
But at the time, Tesla, exactly.
Many others, Russell and, Morey, and many inventors.
Right. So this is not necessarily newer news. It really, from my perspective, becomes a consciousness conversation. Are we ready? Is the consciousness ready to sort of, using your language, Barnett, put the clutch in on the way we've done things, shift, and I think it really becomes a masculine-feminine issue. Can we rebalance so that we're more open to this the subtle energies and the way of working with and the harmonizing versus manipulating, controlling, and dominating?
Can we unify? Yeah, absolutely.
It's a fundamental human question.
Absolutely. And, it has to do with the stressors in our society as well that are kind of like forcing us to find new solutions. So they're important too, you know, like the environment impacts that we have around the world, global warming issues, many things are demanding now that we start paying attention.
Honestly, I think interpersonal things, just dissatisfaction with the status quo on every level.
Yeah, and so it's changing very fast. So I'm actually very enthusiastic. I'm very positive that we will make this shift, that we will do the transformation because it's critical we do it. First of all, it's critical we do it. Like, we are at the 11th and a half hour, you know. Right. I'm very encouraged because I see people from all flux of life that are actually completely transforming. You're talking CEOs of large corporations. You're talking, very prominent political figures, military personnel, agencies. All everything is being infiltrated with people that are awakening and that are going, wait a minute.
Go ahead. One of the things that's fascinating is just the stressor piece, that the stressor is a required part of the transformation. I don't know what that means, but I like there's something about that rings true.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have this model of conquering heroes, and we beat a world or an other into submission. And something that I feel about the stressors is that for those of us who have become quite masterful at the old heroic model, there is this new post-heroic model where instead of conquering, there is this submitting. There's a heroic submission to the mystery, right. And then the subtle energy is allowed to. We allow ourselves to come into relationship with that which has been holding us all along. Right. But I'm very curious. First of all, I love your optimism, and I'm inspired by your optimism. And as a scientist and an edge dweller, I am curious what you see. If I could ask you, if you're willing to peer into the near future, what are the kinds of developments that you are aware of in terms of real innovation? What are the sorts of things that are on the right at the on the verge?
Yeah, at the cutting edge.
On the cutting edge of changing the way we understand what life is on this planet.
There's many. The first thing that comes to mind, because this is a big interest of mine, is there is multiple experiments in laboratories all around the world now that are confirming gravitational beams, so like starting to be able to alter gravity in a region of space where things starts losing weight, where they're able to create a gravitational beam that will move things at a distance and that propagates at some 64 times the speed of light. There's a lot going on in French laboratories as well on gravity that are showing that this is absolutely possible, and it's right there.
So let me get very practical.
Yes.
Does this even mean my trip to San Francisco is going to be
a thought away?
A thought away?
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
That's amazing.
And maybe your trip to Jupiter for the weekend. Because as soon as you control gravity, you live in a completely different paradigm.
When that begins to, the implications of that start to trickle down to the lives of people on this planet.
Right.
That's a very, very different recipe for life as a human being.
Absolutely. But as well, it's kind of critical because when you think of a planetary system, and I'm not the only one saying this at this point, like for instance, Stephen Hawking has been talking like this for a few years now. Planetary systems are not stable places. One little comet comes too close and we lose the atmosphere. That one sun flare, one large enough meteorite, and it doesn't have to be that large, and it's extension time. So this, the fact that we're still here and we're alive is already incredible grace when you consider the probabilities. But the fact, but at one point, any society on any planet, at one point has to learn to fly, because the planet is like the nest of a bird. And when the birds in the nest are big enough and there's too many of them, you don't want to wait till the next storm, because the nest's gonna fall out of the tree, and if the birds can't fly, they're done. And so we as a species have to learn to fly and evolve into a species that lives in the universe, that lives in space. And in order to do that, and people like Branson and Elon Musk and so on are wanting to colonize Mars, and this effort even in the private sector to get us out there in space, but we're not gonna do it
with
burning
big rockets.
Yeah, burning fossil fuel. That is not even feasible. It's not reasonable.
It
doesn't work. We have to harmonize with gravity, understand it at its fundamental level, and then utilize it to free ourselves.
And I'm going to propose we have to expand our consciousness.
Absolutely.
That's the fundamental principle.
That is a fundamental principle. It goes hand in hand with us achieving this, and the survival of our species is critical. That we're able to transcend our limitations, go from a society of scarcity based on less there is of something, more value it has, to a society of abundance, knowing that there's infinite amount of resources, there's an infinite amount of energy, and the value of something is what somebody does with it.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. The currency, the exchange.
That's right.
We'd love to know more about what is going on in your world. We have about a minute and a half left. So tell us how people can find you. I know you have a nonprofit. What's the way that we can get involved in more of your work?
Well, people can go to the Resonance Project Foundation on the internet. The website is resonance.is or resonance is. And we actually have a gift for the listeners today.
We love gifts.
If you go to resonance.is/gift, we have a 2-hour interview with one of the board of directors of the foundation, asking questions about physics. We had a wonderful time near a fireplace, and we're just talking and talking stories, as we say in Hawaii. And it's really kind of a fun interview, because you get into the nitty-gritty of the physics and how it relates to us and what it's bringing in the world.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
The whole thing is beautiful. The organizing towards beauty seems fundamentally right. And if it's not beautiful, then we have to keep looking, because the way the geometry, the way things work, they are patterned. We are patterned.
Right.
It's, for me, again, I can't do math. I can barely, I can barely add,
balance your checkbook.
No, I don't balance my checkbook. Thank God the bank does that for me.
I have the same problem.
Oh, good. That's very helpful. But the beauty makes sense to me, because if I organize towards beauty, my life works. That's all I can tell you.
Right, absolutely. And I think, the concept of beauty is present in mathematics. It is an accepted concept in mathematics that something, and this is very prominent, that something, if it's right, should be beautiful. Meaning simple, self-consistent, and so on.
I love it. And with that, the beauty.
We thank you for joining us in studio.
Awesome.
Listeners, we thank you for joining us wherever you are. Thank you again for listening in, for supporting the program, for supporting Insight Events USA and Hierophant Publishing. And until next time, good moment.